Hey folks, I wanted to record a spoiler deep dive review for Jurassic World Rebirth. So the film has been out since Wednesday. I've only seen it once at the point of recording this, but I've seen a lot of different reviews, a lot of people who have got different perspectives on this film. So I thought it would be interesting to share mine and to talk a little bit more about the things I really enjoyed in this film, because there is a lot that I thought was really good, but also some of the issues that I had with the film and some of the things that really made it more a 6 out of 10 for me than necessarily sort of as high as Jurassic World, Jurassic Park, and those other entries. So we'll just start by jumping into the good things, really. So, on the front of things I really enjoyed with this film, the core characters are fantastic. I really love Dr. Henry Loomis, and I think that Zora Bennett, whilst not perhaps as strong as Loomis, is still a really interesting and compelling character. We do get layers of backstory to these characters. I have to admit, it is a little bit clumsily layered into the story, but it does make a lot of sense in terms of the fact that Zora is somebody who's been through a lot of trauma. So over the course of this kind of journey on this island, we really see her character kind of reflecting on that and thinking that maybe there's a better way for her to use her skills to actually make a difference. And also Duncan Kincaid here, he had a really good presence throughout the film as well. I actually really like Duncan's character. I think whenever he's on screen, we don't necessarily get as much of him as we do Loomis and Bennett, but I just feel like he kind of has this air of somebody who knows what he's doing. He feels quite authoritative, and I really enjoyed that. I think a lot of the characters around them, so kind of Atwater, Leclerc, some of the others, feel very underdeveloped, unfortunately. So you don't really get as much time with them. We do establish a little bit for Atwater, which I found quite interesting. So I was like, oh, are we gonna end up getting a Robert Muldoon kind of character here? And then he dies very quickly in the film. So that was unfortunate, but I understand why they did that. It was kind of the shock effect of actually, we're going to the island initially, we're kind of dropping like flies. So we need to be really careful in this operation. And one character I haven't mentioned, but somebody I do think stood out as well, is Martin Krebs. Very obvious what kind of character he was going to be. I have to admit, I would have maybe preferred it if they'd flipped it and sort of had the angle of he's this corporate guy who actually wants to do this for good. I just think that would have been a little bit fresher here. But he was acted incredibly well, and I really enjoyed his character. And I haven't touched on the family, but I think the family were pretty good as well. Obviously, we had Teresa, we had Ruben, and we had Isabella, the Delgados, and I thought they were really solid. Isabella, particularly, the actress who played her, did a really good job of capturing just how scared a child would be. And I like how her relationship with Dolores, who is probably the most adorable part of this film, is built on this idea of trauma and trauma bonding. That was quite interesting. So that kind of overall is my thoughts really on the characters. And I think alongside the characters, something I really like is a lot of the set pieces here. So obviously it's been discussed in so much of the marketing, but we do get the river raft sequence from Jurassic Park. The one thing I would say is unfortunate is we saw that entire sequence in the marketing. I don't quite know why that was a decision that was made to give that away. But that sequence really does play out well. The Rex is intimidating, it's really fantastic. And I think something else that stood out to me is the Mosasaur attack as well. And especially kind of the Mosasaur attack on the family initially. There's this one shot where the boyfriend is stuck underwater and you kind of see the sail of the boat pointing downwards. You've got the ominous shadow of the Mosasaur behind him. And I just really enjoyed that. I thought that was cool. I also felt that a lot of the third act of the film featured some really good set pieces. I really enjoyed kind of the stuff in the original facility. Once we got to see more of that, I thought that was cool. The idea of being hunted in the tunnels is always quite claustrophobic, so that worked fairly well. But I think some of the pacing in those set pieces wasn't perhaps as great as the ones that came earlier on. So I definitely enjoyed the earlier on ones a lot more. I also thought the dinosaur designs were great here. You know, I love the new Rex. I think it's obvious everyone does. I also think the Titanosaurs have really grown on me. At first, I was kind of like, oh, a whiptail, that's quite interesting. But actually, I really, really do like that animal. And the same with, you know, Dolores, the new design for the Velociraptors, even if they appear briefly, and some of the other creatures here as well. I am interested if in the bonus features we're going to get a closer look at kind of the Carnotaurus, the Diabloceratops, and some of the other animals that we know were cut from this film, because it would be quite interesting to see what they would have looked like. And obviously behind me we've got the Distortus Rex. I personally quite like the design of the Distortus. I think it makes sense to be amalgamated and kind of mutated. And this is something I've really wanted to see since Jurassic World. I think it makes so much sense with this kind of science that you're doing science that is so unnatural that things are going to go wrong and creatures like the Distortus are going to be created. So I thought that worked really well. And then the last thing in the positives for me really is the cinematography. I thought the cinematography in this film was absolutely gorgeous. I mean, as we know, it's been shot on Kodak, and you really can tell the sequences with the waterfalls, sequences with the sunset on the boat, and a few other bits and pieces really do look beautiful. There are some moments where the CGI blending isn't fantastic, but beyond that, I just think this is a really gorgeous film. And what I really love about the decision to film on Kodak cameras and to use film is there's this real grittiness and this kind of visceral nature to this film that definitely feels a lot more like classic Jurassic. I think with Jurassic World, you had the unfortunate blue color grading that everyone knows about and everyone comments about online. And I do think here this is really a step away from that and a step back to this kind of practical filmmaking that really grounds you in the environment. You know, you feel like you're in that forest on Isle St. Hubert. Really butchered that there. And that I just think is really cool. So that visceral nature of the filmmaking works really well. So those are kind of my positives. We're going to move on to the negatives. And the first negative for me really is the lack of cohesive storytelling. I was really disappointed that so much kind of storytelling was left up in the air, especially when it came to the facility on Isle St. Hubert and kind of what InGen had been doing in that laboratory. It's really hinted at that this is a precursor to the Indominus Rex. This is something that went wrong, but I don't think it would have taken a lot to make that connection in maybe not a massively overt way, but in a way that just gives that payoff for long-term fans who have watched all of these films and can piece together that connective tissue. It just felt really that this film was very disjointed. Like they knew they wanted InGen in this film, they knew they wanted to reference classic Jurassic. And they didn't really want to do the homework to make it fit within things. And that always really bothers me. I think if you've predefined the canon for a film series or a television show or something else entirely, then actually there is no harm in doing a little bit of research to make it fit. So for me, it just felt a little bit disjointed. And I think that is the thing with this film is I wouldn't have had an issue with that if it felt like it built towards something, but it kind of feels like we cut away a lot of story threads that were left hanging after Jurassic World Dominion that have been sort of left hanging more broadly, and then we don't do anything with that. We don't really build to any kind of crescendo or any kind of direction for the future of the franchise. So I found that really disappointing. And I think paired with that, the thing that I found frustrating was that there were moments where they tried to make connection, but they didn't make any sense. So the weirdest thing is the fact that this Mosasaurus is apparently the Jurassic World Mosasaur. Why? What is the point of making that connection if you're making such a determined effort to disconnect yourself from everything else? Just have this be a separate animal. Don't make it convoluted and actually don't just messy the lore for people who do enjoy that side of it, because there are people who are invested in this franchise, and who care about the ongoing story and the connectivity there. I do think at times, more broadly as well, this really feels like a popcorn flick. And what I mean by that is it feels like it's a series of set pieces where each one tries to be grander than the last, rather than having a heft of emotional weight behind it. I never really felt like the characters were in much danger, because a lot of the deaths have been spoiled in the trailers. So I kind of felt like I knew that in the third act, at least, we weren't going to get any deaths. Um, and so what you kind of get there is just these set pieces which don't really have emotional weight behind them, and they feel really bare bone. And I think the biggest example I can really give with that is the ending and how non-consequential it feels. So we've seen online, Gareth has spoken about the fact that he and Mahershala originally wanted Duncan to die at the end of this film, and I think that would have been so much more impactful. But instead, we get something that feels very superhero-esque, where it's, oh no, our main character can't die, they have actually survived the unlikely situation, which maybe works fine if it's a Captain America film, but it doesn't work as well in Jurassic, where it's meant to be grounded. So I was quite disappointed to see that, and to really kind of feel like all of the emotional value had been sucked out of this film from the marketing as well. And then the last thing that I thought was a little bit weird was some of the inconsistencies. I mean, Ruben gets injured, he hurts his leg, but it seems to come and go throughout the film. Sometimes it hurts, sometimes it doesn't. That just felt a little bit off. Also, the size of the Distortus Rex, that whole thing with the Distortus Rex breaking out and how that all worked, all of that just felt very weirdly inconsistent, and I don't think there was enough thought really put into that to explain it. So that really leads us into my overall thoughts. So overall, I think this was a fun story, but it doesn't have the same connectivity that I really enjoy with Jurassic. And I think my big fear more broadly is Jurassic for me has always been something that hasn't had an element of grounded storytelling. I mean, Crichton's novels really do go in depth into characters, into story, into interconnectivity, and that just didn't feel like it was present here. And I think what I fear more broadly is if we're building a franchise going forward, with where we are currently, it feels like the direction of this franchise is much more popcorn flick, seats, where you're sat purely for the kind of spectacle more so than anything else, and not a storytelling rich narrative. And that for me personally is just something that I don't think is appealing as a Jurassic fan. Like, Jurassic for me is so much more than the set pieces, it's everything that comes together. It's the connectivity, it's the finding out that the bunker in Fallen Kingdom was part of the original park infrastructure. Things like that, they don't have to be things that constantly connect to the original, but it's just things that feel coherent film to film that I think are quite important for people who are invested in this franchise. And I do think the last thing I would say is Universal have got a bit of an issue where they feel the need to constantly tie back to the iconography and the nostalgia of the original Jurassic Park, where it isn't necessarily earned. Yes, this film tonally feels a lot more like Jurassic Park than the Jurassic World trilogy, but it doesn't connect directly to it. And so I think weighting the marketing so heavily on this being the test site for the original park and all of that kind of stuff was A, disingenuous because those lines aren't actually in the film, but B, it also banks on nostalgia, and nostalgia wears thin. And I do worry that if the franchise continues in this direction, we're soon going to run out of the nostalgia that fans have, and then what do we have left? I do feel like there was a better story to tell here. I am going to make another video at some point on the story that I wish Rebirth had been, so do stay tuned for that. And do let me know if you enjoyed this film. I know that this review has probably been relatively negative. I do really enjoy this franchise, and I think that Universal and the teams behind this franchise do really great things with a lot of what they do with the Jurassic World IP, and I'm really glad that exactly that. We have a Jurassic World IP. We have a step up from Jurassic Park that now feels like it has a relevance within the cultural zeitgeist that maybe the original franchise didn't have. But what I think is really important is that they don't water it down and they maintain the consistency and the excellent storytelling for this franchise, because otherwise we do run the risk of this going the same way as Fast and the Furious, this going the same way as other franchises that are too action orientated, which is eventually audiences will get burned out and then the dinosaurs will go extinct forever. I hope that doesn't happen. I look forward to seeing where the next story goes, but for now, that's my thoughts on Rebirth. Do let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure to like, favourite, and subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos in the future.